The Prophet ﷺ has said, Al-Hasan wal-Hussein Sayyidan Shabab Ahl al-Jannah. They are the leaders of the youth of paradise. Now the riwayah is that when we die and inshallah we go to heaven, we'll all be young. Even my father, who is 92 years old, when he dies, inshallah he goes to heaven, he will be young. He will be 30 times younger and stronger than when he was at his best. So whatever age you are, if you are at your best at age 20, 30, 40, 50, you will be 30 times stronger, more handsome, more smarter, more whatever, 30 times greater. So no matter how old you are, how big you are, Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein will be your masters in heaven. And the Prophet ﷺ also said, Al-Hasan wal-Hussein imaman kama aw ka'ada. Meaning whether they stand up or they rise or they sit down, they don't rise. What that means is they are the imams in this world and in the hereafter. Whatever they say, you must follow. If they rise, if they call to war, they stand up and go to war, you must rise and follow them without any questions asked. If they decide to sit, not to rise and not to go to war, you have to listen to them and do whatever they say. They are your imams in this world and in the hereafter. There's no two things about it. There has always been an issue for 1400 years that Imam Hassan alayhi salam did not like to go to war, he didn't want to fight, he stayed home, whatever, unlike Imam Hussein, who was like Imam Ali. Imam Ali alayhi salam, the Prophet in his departing will to him said, unless you have 40 believers, don't rise, don't go to war. And you all know the story when they buried Fatima Zahra alayhi salam, and the second one wanted to dig up the grave so they can take her out and rebury her and pray over her. Imam Ali stood there, he picked him up and threw him to the floor, and he was going to rip his head off, and then he said, if it wasn't for the Prophet's conditions. He said, what did the Prophet say? He said, he told me to be patient. He said, well, you can't go against the Prophet's word, you have to remain patient. So by Imam Ali being patient, he wasn't going to beat up the second one. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Last year, during Ashura, a Sunni theologian, he calls himself, he's a scholar, he calls himself a scholar. His name is Yasser Kavi. He gave a lecture that lasted over an hour and a half, describing what the tragedy of Karbala was and what happened in Ashura. And he said, from the beginning, he said, he's a graduate, he's a lecturer at some university or some center in the United States. I had the quotation, I can't find it, it doesn't matter anyway. And he said basically, the first Muslim historian was Abu Mikhnaf, and he died in the year 91 after Ashura. So that was 30 years after the tragedy of Karbala. He said, however, and he says, everybody recognizes he's the first Muslim historian. He said, however, because our scholars, their scholars, they don't quote him, I will not refer to him. I am going to refer to Ibn Kathir and Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Kathir, now remember, Abu Mikhnaf died 30 years after Ashura. So there is a very strong chance that he was, a man during, when Ashura started in his 30s, 40s. So he was fully intellectual. Ibn Kathir was born more than 600 years after the tragedy of Karbala, and Ibn Taymiyyah more than 700 years after. So logically, there is a gap. When they gather information, there is a gap between when the event started and when you hear it many years later. So if you ask me a story about what happened yesterday, it's still fresh in my memory, and most people still remember it. But when you go 50 years or 700 years, anything is possible. But he says it from the outset. And he sort of described Imam Hassan. He said, Muawiyah was greedy. He wanted the caliphate, this, that, the other. They fought with Ali ibn Abi Talib. He says, radiyallahu anhu. We say, alayhi salam. And then Imam Ali was killed. And then Imam Hassan assumed the caliphate. And he was the caliph for 6 months. But then Muawiyah, he lacked power. So what Imam Hassan did, and look how wise, and this is his words, how wise Imam Hassan was. He said, enough bloodshed, enough of the Muslim blood being shed. During the caliphate of Imam Ali, 4.5 years, 5 years, there were more Muslims killed than during the entire 23 years that the Prophet assumed the message. And during the Prophet, the Muslims had 83 battles. So Imam Hassan said, enough bloodshed. You want the caliphate? You have it. And he handed it over. He was a very wise man, a very pious man who really loved Islam. And then when it came to Al-Hasan, he was wrong. He was always fiery. He was always ready for fight. He was so trying to portray that there were two different people. And yet, according to the Prophet ﷺ, there is no difference between Al-Hasan and Al-Husayn. The only difference is Al-Hasan was a year older than Al-Husayn ﷺ. Otherwise, they were identical. And Imam Husayn ﷺ was to Imam Hassan like Al-Abbas was to Imam Hussein. During the tragedy when Al-Abbas was eventually martyred, Imam Hussein said, Al-an kasara dahri. Now my back is broken. And we all know, when you break your back, you are paralyzed from head to toes. You can't move, you can't do anything. And the Imam is using this analogy to fully describe exactly what happened to him. Once he lost his brother, he lost everything. And Imam Hussein was to Imam Hassan the same. As long as Imam Hussein was by his right side, by his side, Imam Hassan was invincible. Again, same analogy with the Prophet ﷺ and Imam Ali. As long as Imam Ali was alive, no one could touch the Prophet. Even in the Battle of Uhud, when they all abandoned the Prophet and ran away, and the Prophet was saying, Ya Ali, my right, Ya Ali, my left, Ya Ali, behind me, Ya Ali, in front of me, Ya Ali, to the right, Ya Ali, and Imam Ali was everywhere. And Imam Ali got wounded. It's not that he never got, he was hurt, he was wounded, he was bleeding, but he was there, left, right, and center, protecting the Prophet. During the migration, I know I'm sort of, going, but I just want to get to the point about Imam Hassan. When the Prophet ﷺ migrated, when God ordered him to migrate from Mecca to Medina, he asked Imam Ali to stay in his bed. Imam Ali said, how can I leave you go by yourself? He said, will you be safe? He said, yes. He said, all right, if you will be safe, then I will sleep in your bed. But there's no way I'm going to leave you and not be by your side. So, my role is to protect you, protect the message. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So, when Imam Hassan ﷺ decided to hand over the caliphate, he declared war on Muawiyah. Muawiyah refused to fight him. Muawiyah's own men, own advisors, Amr ibn al-As, you all know him, and Marwan ibn al-Hakam. They say, why don't you go to war? You have 120,000 soldiers. And again, just a point here. Once an Iraqi went to Syria, and a Syrian accused him of stealing his camel. And to cut a long story short, they went to Muawiyah, and Muawiyah declared, the Syrian said, no, this is my camel, and Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The Syrian declared that the camel was his, so Muawiyah ruled that the camel belongs to the Syrian, and and the Iraqi should be killed. The Iraqi laughed and he said, you know, may God forgive you. May God not forgive you. Allah ysamhak. Now, he had nothing to lose. You know, they declared for him to be killed. So he told Muawiyah, Allah ysamhak. He said, how dare you say this to me? He said, because my camel, they were ruling on a jamal, meaning a male camel. He said, it's not a jamal, it's a naka, a female camel. You can't even tell the difference. Muawiyah said, give him the camel back, give him 10,000 dirham, and let him go. He said, go back to your leader, tell him I have 120,000 soldiers who can't tell the difference between a male camel and a female camel. So if it is a female, I said, no, it's a male. If it is black and I say it's white, they accept. So that's to show that how powerful he was. 120,000. Imam Hassan declared war against him. And he called on all his leaders to rise and bring their men with them. Now, in those days, when we talk about armies, they didn't have armies like conventional armies like we have here. They had leaders. Every leader of a clan, for example, I'm a leader of one clan, I have 200 men. You are a leader of one clan, you have 2,000 men. He's the leader of a clan, he's got 20,000 men. So when the call comes out, the leaders rise and their men rise with them. And they're all armed men. And that's how they sort of work out the numbers and they go to the battle. Imam Hassan called out on all his leaders and his followers to rise. And they wouldn't rise. They wouldn't respond to the call. In the meantime, Muawiyah was behind the scenes bribing them, giving them money, buying them, threatening them. Some he killed, some he imprisoned, some he could buy. One of the greatest loss for Imam Hassan alayhi salam was his cousin, Ubaidullah ibn al-Abbas. Al-Abbas was the Prophet's uncle and Imam Ali's uncle. So Ubaidullah, his son, he was Imam Hassan's commander-in-chief of his army. Muawiyah bribed him and he gave him 1 million dinar. They say alf dinar. Yeah, 1 million dinar. And he brought him out. And again, as I said, when the leader goes, all his men follow with him. So when he was betrayed by his own cousin, Imam Hassan said, you know, what am I going to fight with? And it goes even further to that. They even attacked Imam Hassan's camp. His own people rebelled against him and attacked his camp, and they hit him with an axe on his leg, and they wounded him, and he was their leader. He handed over the caliphate, and Muawiyah came from Syria, from Sham to Iraq, to the mosque in Kufa to, you know, declare that he's the caliph. And he started to make a speech, and he started belittling the Ahlul Bayt, and he started to use derogatory terms against Imam Ali alayhi salam. Both Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein alayhi salam were sitting. Imam Hussein rose, and maybe that's why they say he was a bit, you know, fiery. You know, he spoke with his sword. Imam Hassan grabbed him and said, sit down. Imam Hussein sat down. Imam Hassan rose. And he addressed Muawiyah in the middle of the palace. He said, "O you who mention Ali, I am Al-Hasan, and Ali was my father. You are Muawiyah, and your father was Sakhr, Abu Sufyan. I am Al-Hasan, and Fatima was my mother. You are Muawiyah, and your mother was Hind. I am Al-Hasan, and my grandfather was the Prophet of God, the Apostle of God. You are Muawiyah, and your grandfather was Harb. Harb was known, he was very, very a great kafir. Even Abu Sufyan was a kafir and remained a kafir until he died. But my grandmother was Khadija, and your grandmother was Futayla. Now, Futayla is described as a wicked woman. I can't use the terminology because there are some young children, but she was a woman of very bad virtue. And she was very well known for that. And everybody knew that. So look at the comparison. And then Imam Hassan alayhi salam says, may God curse him who tries to reduce our reputation and diminish our nobility, who does evil against our antiquity, meaning our ancestry. and yet has preceded us in disbelief and hypocrisy. So has preceded us in kufr and being a liar. So when you have a situation like this where a man who is so cold or described as, he didn't like war or whatever, he stands up in the middle of the man's palace and challenges him in front of him, now you can't say that, he didn't like war or didn't want to fight. And he called him a liar. Same thing, subhanAllah, when Imam Zain al-Abidin was addressing Yazid, and the Muaddin was reciting the adhan, and he said, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. And Imam Zain al-Abidin said, please stop. He said, Yazid, this name is he your grandfather or my grandfather? If you say he's your grandfather, then you're a liar. And if you say he is my grandfather, so why did you kill his grandson? I mean, how more straightforward can you be with that? Anyway, I think I'm running out of time for just quickly. Imam Hassan was known for his piety, for his worship. He was known for his generosity. He was called Karim Ahlul Bayt. No one ever who went to him came back empty-handed. And not only that, he came back twice with the reward, sometimes 3 times. Very quickly, a couple of short stories before I finish. We all know that Imam Hassan alayhi salam performed the Hajj 20 times from Medina to Mecca on foot. Sometimes they say, some say 25 times, some 20 times. Once they were on the way, and he used to go barefoot. You know how our brothers are going, inshallah, in the next few days to Iraq to do the walk from Najaf to Karbala. It's about 80 kilometers. And many of them do it barefoot. Imam Hassan used to travel from Medina to Mecca, which is about 485 kilometers, almost 500 kilometers, on foot, no shoes. He was walking, and one of his helpers saw that Imam Hassan's feet were swollen, and they were blistered and bleeding. He came to him, he said, O son of Rasulullah, why don't you let me get you a camel or a horse so you can mount it and keep, going on your journey to Mecca. Look at, your feet. Imam Hassan said, no. What I want you to do is to go to the next town. There is a man, his name is so and so. You find him and you tell him he has a lotion and you buy it off him. Take money with you. Whatever price he has, don't argue with him. Whatever price he has, you pay it and you bring me the lotion. I will wash my feet with this lotion and my feet will be cured. The helper said, as you wish. He went, got on a horse, traveled to the next town, and eventually he found that man. He said, I'm here to purchase the lotion that you have. And the man said, what lotion? How do you know I have a lotion? He said, my master sent me to you, and so you must have. He said, who is your master? He said, Al-Hasan ibn Ali. Ibn Abi Talib, he said, I will give it to you under one condition. He said, you take me to your master. I said, as you wish, but it's a bit at a distance, a bit far away. And like I was riding my my horse to get here. He said, no, you want the lotion, you take me to him. Anyway, he came to the Imam alayhi salam, and he said, the helper said, I've got the man here, but he said he'll only give it to you, and he wants an audience with you. Imam Hassan said, let him come in. He went in. He said, how did you know I have the lotion? The Imam smiled. He said, I know. Did you bring your lotion with you? He said, yeah, but nobody knows about it. I made it. Nobody knows about it. How did you know that I made it and I had it and where I am and who I was? And Imam Hassan said, this is one of the gifts of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We know certain things that ordinary people don't know. He said, I'm here to give it to you, but I have one request. Imam Hassan alayhi salam smiled. He said, yes, it's been granted. The man said, I haven't asked you yet. He said, I know what you're going to ask, and yes, it's been granted. Your wife just gave birth to a son. He will be pious, and he will become one of our followers. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Indeed, his wife was pregnant, and he says, and he wanted to ask Imam Hassan, he says, pray to God that he grant me a son, and I want this son to be pious, a good Muslim. Imam Hassan knew all this. There's another story very quickly, I still have 1 minute. Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein, and their cousin Abdullah ibn Ja'far, who used to be Sayyidah Zainab's husband. They were traveling somewhere, whatever, and they rested. They were in a caravan. The caravan left before them. Anyway, they stopped at a place. Then when they saw a place, they went in. They were a bit thirsty. They wanted some water. They knocked on the door. An old lady answered, yes, what do you want? They said, we're just travelers, and we're hot, thirsty. Do you have a bit of water for us to drink? She said, no, I have no water, but I have this ewe, which is a female goat. I have this goat. If you milk it, you can drink its milk. They said, no problem. They milked it, and they drank a bit of the milk. Then they asked, do you have any food, because we're a bit hungry? She said, no, I only have this goat. If you want, you can kill it, and then we'll cook it, and then you can eat. They killed the goat, and then they barbecued it, and they had a barbecue. Then they said, we're a bit tired. Would you mind if we just have a bit of rest, just to rest before we go on our journey? She said, no, do as you please. They had a bit of a rest, then they got up, and Imam Hassan, they all thanked her, and Imam Hassan said, we are from Quraysh, we live in Medina. When you come to Medina, come and visit us. She said, inshallah, and then they left. A short while later, her husband came home, and he was looking for the goat. He couldn't find it. And he said, where's the goat? She said, oh, some travelers came by, and they asked for food and drink, and we had nothing, so I offered them the goat. And he said, what? You gave them the only thing we have? How much money did they give you? She said, I didn't ask them for money. Who were they? She said, I didn't ask who they were. So he started beating her up because she gave her whatever, the only thing they had. And he was beating her every day for doing that. A few days later, she left. I don't know how long, later, a week, couple of weeks, a month. She went to Medina, and she says, this man, he appeared to be a gentleman. He said, a pious man. If I ever need anything, to come and ask. She got to Medina, but she didn't even know his name. Imam Hassan alayhi salam saw her, and he approached her. He saluted her. He said, do you remember? She said, no. He said, we were your guests. You were the lady who welcomed us and gave us the goat, the milk. She said, yes, yes, yes. And Imam Hassan said, what bring you here? She said nothing. She started crying. Imam Hassan knew exactly what had happened. He called one of his helpers. He said, give her 1,000 goats from the one we have and 1,000 dinars. They brought it to her and gave it to her. He said, now you go. My brother, Al-Hasan, lives over there. You go to him also. Just say, your brother sent me. She goes to Imam Hussein's house, knocks on the door. They tell Imam Hussein, there's an old lady here, she wants to see. Imam Hussein comes straight away, he sees her. He says, wait here. He calls his helper, bring her 1,000 goats and 1,000 dinars. Same thing happened, and he said, our cousin, Abdullah ibn Ja'far, who was with us, lives over there. Go and knock on his door. Tell him Al-Hussein sent you. Same so he goes, knocks on the door. Abdullah comes, give her 1,000 goats and 1,000 dinars. She goes back to her husband. He said, you know these men that you've been beating me for welcoming them. This is what they gave you. She throws the money at him, the 3,000 dinars and the 3,000 goats, and she said, Bi'aminillah, and she leaves him. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Imam Hassan alayhi salam was murdered by Muawiyah, who bribed Imam Hassan's own wife. He promised her that if she killed Imam Hassan, he will give her 100,000 dinars, and he will marry her to his son Yazid, and Yazid was the prince, so when Muawiyah dies, Yazid will become the king. So she carried she did what he asked her to do. And then Imam Hassan, she poisoned him. Now, we are not in the months of Ramadan. Right? Imam Hassan was fasting, and she brought him food to break his fast, and she put poison in it. When Imam Hassan tasted it, he knew straight away that she had been poisoned. He called one of his help. He said, go and call my brother Hussein. Imam Hussein came over, and he told him, this is the one that my grandfather had told me about. Imam Hassan had been poisoned many times before. He was poisoned many times, but he knew it wasn't the one. Subhanallah. Same as Imam Ali, when he was in the battlefield, and he would be hit in the head, and he comes to her, is that the blow that's going to kill me? He says, no, that's not the one. It will happen when the blood from here will taint this thread. So he said, but this is the one. And Imam Hassan's face started to turn green from the effect of the poison. And Imam Hassan spewed his own liver because of the effect of the poison. He made his will to Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and he told him, my wish is to be buried next to my grandfather in my grandfather's mosque. I know they will rise and they will rebel. If they do, don't battle them, don't fight with them. Bury me in the Baqi' next to my grandmother, Fatima bint Asad, the mother of Imam Ali alayhi salam. So they shrouded Imam Hassan, they carried him, and they went to what is now known the Baqi'. They went to the Prophet's cemetery to bury him next to him, and then Marwan ibn al-Hakam came with the lady at the head, and she was screaming, no one, the one that I hate will not enter my house. I mean, she was one of 9 wives, and she claims the house of the Prophet was her entire property, but that's another issue. And yet she objected, and they even threw arrows at the coffin. Abu Fadl al-Abbas alayhi salam rose with Bani Hashim, and they pulled their sword out, and they were going to make mincemeat out of them. Imam Hussein said no. Abdullah ibn al-Abbas was the brother of Ubaidullah, the cousin. He said to them, stop, there's no need for a battle, because it was Imam Hassan's wish that we take him to bid farewell to his grandfather before we bury him, and we're going to bury him next to his grandmother. And he turned to the woman, and he says to her, what mischief you bring about. One day on a camel, and another day on a mule. Go back. By God, victory will come to this house, no matter how long it takes. And if you look, I mentioned our brothers going to march in the next few days. Last year, the official figure was 20 million people. 20 million, 1,400 years later. This year, despite the worshipper of the shaitan threatening, they're expecting a bigger crowd than last year. Imam Hassan alayhi salam was 46 years old when he was martyred. He was born in the year 3 after Hijrah, and he passed away, or he was murdered, on the year 49. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept our small deeds and our commemoration of all the Imams alayhi salam, particularly Imam Hassan, because they call him Mazlum Ahlul Bayt. During his birth, not many people attend to celebrate, and during his death, again, not many people attend. And he's always been labeled with the wrong definition over the years for whatever reason. The bottom line is very simple. They're just trying to disunite the Muslims, and particularly the followers of the Ahlul Bayt, the Shia of Ahlul Bayt. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I ask you to recite the Fatiha for all our departed ones, your dead ones, our dead ones, and in particular the founders of this Husayni, these associations headed by Sheikh Fahad Mehdi al-Amiri, Haj Abu Abdullah al-Kazimi, my brother-in-law Haj Abu Ja'far al-Bahrani, and all your dead ones, preceded by Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.